Okay, team. Today I'm going to talk invoicing in Trak. So there are many different ways to invoice in the Trak platform. And today I want to start with, I guess, just a very basic overview of invoicing. Now, number one thing to consider when we are talking about invoicing in Trak is you must have a quote to create an invoice. Now, some businesses will quote every job, then they'll either take a deposit or multiple invoices and finish the job. Some people will go out to site, they will do the work, they'll get to the end, they'll generate it all together onto an invoice and charge the customer. Some people will get a set rate for work. So they'll get a purchase order, then they'll need to set it up and they'll need to invoice the job, whether it's once or multiple times for the duration. There are lots of different ways to create and manage that process, but everything that happens in Trak when it comes to invoicing will come from a quote. So when I open a job in Trak, I can see that you can have multiple quotes within a job, which is great. Now, for those businesses who are just doing a job on site and they're just going to charge hourly rate for the job and they just want to create an invoice, that will still start here. You'll still create it. You will still put in the information, whether it's a description or notes, whether it's line items or products. Simply at the bottom, you won't save it and go through the quote process. You'll just press the invoice button. It'll invoice this whole tab in full. Okay, so even though you're clicking on the quote tab, you're generating an invoice at the bottom of the page and it will invoice the whole thing. So nice and simple in regards to the way that you can invoice if you're doing, I guess, do and charge invoicing. It's just not a quote. You've gone out to site, it's an emergency job, and you're just generating an invoice. For those businesses who are receiving a purchase order, so they're not quoting the job, they might have set rates and a builder or a client just says, hey, here's the purchase order, do the work. You'll do the same thing. You'll come into the job, you'll create the quote. In the same manner, you'll put in the details of the purchase order. So it might be, PO number or something similar with an amount of money. And instead of having to go through the approval or the invoice tab because you haven't done the job yet, you'll just save that job as approved, and then you will just create that and save it in the system. So that will then be sitting here in your quotes tab, and it will be approved, and it will be waiting for you to invoice it. And all you need to do is click the three dots and press invoice when it's ready to invoice. Okay. Now, the next one obviously are customers who've created a detailed quote and you want to invoice the job. Now, once you've got a quote which has been created, so I see here I've got a quote in the Trak platform. When I open up and have a look at this job in the system, I'll see that it's still in the draft status, okay, which means I can't invoice it yet. When I look at my options, the invoicing option isn't here. The only time that you can invoice is either from an approved quotation or when you're creating the quote to press the invoice button. Okay. If you've got a quote that you've sent to a customer, the first thing that needs to happen is it needs to be approved. Obviously, this can be approved in multiple ways. You can change the status, you can click the approve button, you can open it up, your customer can approve it on their end. Lots of different ways that you can approve it. In this option, I've got a kitchen install and a bathroom install. There are two sections with multiple line items. I can see here that there's an approve option. I'm just going to put some details in here and we're going to approve the quotation. Now, obviously, your customer can do that on their end in the same way, and it will notify you, send you a message, update the status like it's done here. So I can see now that this quote is ready to invoice. Okay, so people will invoice in lots of different ways, but effectively you can select the three dots and press invoice in the job. Okay, from here, this will open up your invoice. Depending on the way that you've got your invoice defaults and settings set up, you'll see that there are some different options here. So number one, up the top of the page, it will give you an overview of what's been happening on this quote. I can see the quote number. I can see the quote amount. I can see what's been invoiced and what is remaining on this job. It doesn't matter how many times you invoice a job. You can invoice a deposit. You can invoice sections or line items or areas of the quote as many times as you need. When you scroll down the page here, I can see that there are two sections for this quotation, and I can see that I've got some default notes at the bottom, and I can also see that there's some default attachments at the bottom. These are customizable to you, and I'll walk through these in your settings shortly. When it comes to actually invoicing the job, you can see here that I've got my sections. Now, at the top, I've got three options. If I want to invoice just a percentage, it might be a deposit. I can just click on the invoice percentage, choose whatever amount I want, and I can invoice that amount. Or if you want to invoice just a random amount of money, I want to take a $500 deposit, for example. You can just check on the amount, choose the amount of money you'd like to invoice, and go from there. Pretty simple. But this option here at the top, this invoice selected line items option, this is really important because here you can choose to invoice an amount or a percentage of individual line items in the system. So in the Trak platform, when you are invoicing through selected line items, you see that you can deselect sections or deselect line items so you're not invoicing them that time. You can then scroll across to our invoice side here, and I can choose to invoice an amount or a percentage of each individual line item. So it is really versatile. If you don't want to invoice a section, just deselect it. If you want to invoice a section, but you only want to invoice, say, 50% of each line item or 10% of this line item, you can. Or if you want to invoice just a dollar amount of this one, you can. It's entirely up to you how you invoice your jobs and how it works for you and your system. If you don't want to invoice an area, don't invoice an area. Once you've got your invoice structured, you can see that you've got your notes and you can see that you've got your attachments. Remember that you can remove attachments or you can add attachments, whether they're from your computer or out of your job information to the invoice. And then from here, you can just save that invoice in the system. Really straightforward in the way that it works. Now, there's a couple of things that you'll note when it comes to invoicing. Your invoice number in Trak will always match your quote number. We don't have, quote 5,000 with invoice 47. It will always match the same number. If it is a partial invoice, it will give it this -1 or -2 or -3 and so on and so forth. Okay. Once your invoice has been created, the three dots on the right allow you to manage it in the system. Whether you're downloading the PDF, sharing it, adding payments, managing it in the system, all of your details are done here. So if you are on site and you create an invoice and you want to add a payment, you'll just click on the add payment option. You can either record a manual payment. If you've got credit cards linked to Trak through Stripe, there'll be a credit card option where you can take a credit card live on site with the customer. You can pay and manage your system right there on the spot. If you are linking credit cards with your customer and you share it via email, there will be an option to pay via credit card on the bottom of the invoice that you send them. They can pay via credit card and it'll update the payment in Trak. So nice and easy in the way that that works. When you share your invoice, it will attach the invoice and the details, and you can then share it out of the platform just by pressing the send button. So pretty straightforward in the way that that works. You can add whoever you want to share it to and send that in the system. You will note that when we are managing our details in the Trak platform, whether we're creating quotes, approving quotes, creating invoices, sharing invoices, keep an eye on your statuses. They are really important. The statuses in this area of the platform are automatic. So when you go into your account, you'll be able to see ones that have been sent, ones that are new, ones that are paid or partially paid, so that you can stay on top of exactly where they're up to. If you are linking this with a Xero or a QuickBooks or a MyOb, it will automatically send the invoice to your accounting package. If you have linked it together and you press the invoice button, it will automatically create it, and it also create it in your accounting package. You can choose to send it to your client either from Trak, or you can choose to send it to your client from Xero or QuickBooks or MyOb or wherever it is that you want. It's up to you. If you mark an invoice as paid in your Xero or QuickBooks or MyOb account and it's linked to Trak, it will refresh that status back in here and update the status for you. You will know if it has been successfully sent to Xero because it will tell you that it's been successfully sent. So you'll be able to see the icon next to it, whether it's a QuickBooks or Xero or MyOb icon. You'll be able to see the status and you'll see that there's a confirmation that it has gone there. When it comes to managing your details in here as well, please note that we don't edit invoices. So in the Trak account, if you've got an invoice that you're not happy with, okay, the best option is to change the status to void. You can change that in here to void, okay, and then from here, you will be able to delete the invoice if you need to. Then you can go back to the quote and you can invoice it again. But we don't edit the values or details because it will lose sync with everything in the system. It'll lose sync with Xero and it will create all sorts of different issues in the background. So if you have a process for invoices that have been done incorrectly, void them, delete them, go back in, re-invoice them, make sure you delete them in Xero. Okay. So once again, on a quote, once it has been partially invoiced, it will update the status to partially invoiced. You can then go back into that quotation and you can invoice it again and again and again to suit your business needs. Once again, you choose the way that you'd like to invoice it. You can choose the details associated with it. It will give you the balance that is remaining so you can see the details of it and you just choose it and press save. Once again, it will tell you the invoice -2 for the second invoice. You can share that with your customer or your client. And from here, you'll be able to see the details associated with it. Invoicing in Trak is really simple. It's really versatile and it's very, very handy. When you have a look at an invoice, you'll be able to see the details associated with it. Okay. If I go back to my quote, I can see now that this quote has been fully invoiced. If I look at this quote in detail, it will also tell me all the invoices that are associated to it. So I can see from the quote, the invoices, the invoice numbers and details, everything links together. So it's easy for you to find associated details. Things aren't getting lost. You can always go back to the quote and see the history of it. Every quote and every invoice in Trak will have its own activity feed. It will have its own updates, and you'll be able to see through its own statuses, critical information regarding this. Now, when you have invoices, at the moment, we're at a job level. So I can see that this is just in regards to this job. At the top of the page, you've got your finances tab. This is your whole of business. So if you want to look at all your invoicing or all of your quoting, you can do this from the top of the page. You can see whole of business requirements in here. You'll be able to see statuses and changes and details. That is exactly the same with your quoting and orders and everything that's happening in the platform. If you need to, you can see your approved quotes from here as well. You can click the 3 dots and you can manage your invoicing as well. A couple of finite details around invoicing. If you have a customer who rings you up and says, thank you very much for sending that invoice, but I'd love it to be made out to a different company name or a different detail, you can go into the job, edit the details of the job and update those details, and then click on the 3 dots next to the invoice and you can refresh that invoice PDF. As long as you're not changing the value, it will update the details on the invoice and then you can download it again and send it to your customer. So you can refresh details on the PDF and then send it to your customer without having to delete, manage, change the whole system, but it will not change the values. Okay. So really handy in the way that this works. Okay, so that's a general overview of invoicing in Trak. You can invoice quickly, you can invoice on the spot, you can take payments, you can take deposits, you can invoice as many times as you like for a quote. If you've got any further questions in regards to invoicing through the Trak platform, please reach out to our team at contact@trak.co. Alternatively, you can reach out to support through the little bubble in the bottom right-hand side, and you can ask us any questions you like. Thank you very much for choosing Trak.